The morning sun had just started to rise over the Dallas airport, painting soft orange light across the windows. Inside the busy terminal, people hurried toward their gates, juggling coffee cups, phones, and small carry-on bags. It looked like every other travel morning, the kind that blended into hundreds of others for frequent flyers. But among the crowd was one woman who seemed strangely calm and distant, almost invisible in her quietness. Her name was Emily Carter, and she was about to board Flight 274 to Washington, D.C. She looked like any other passenger: jeans, a plain gray t-shirt, a navy jacket, and a small duffel bag over her shoulder. Her brown hair was tied neatly back, and her eyes carried a tired gentleness, the kind that told of long nights and unspoken memories. Nobody around her knew that she was Captain Emily Hawk Carter, a retired U.S. Air Force fighter pilot. To everyone else, she was just another traveler sitting in seat 14C. Emily had spent nearly 15 years flying jets for her country. She had taken off from dusty airfields in the Middle East, faced storms in the sky, and carried both fear and pride in her heart every time she went on a mission. She had seen things she rarely talked about, even to her family. And now, after leaving active duty, her life had grown quiet. Too quiet. Civilian life was peaceful but empty in a way she hadn't expected. The rhythm of her days was now slow. Mornings with coffee instead of pre-flight checks. Soft music instead of the roar of engines. Still, part of her heart remained somewhere above the clouds. She boarded the plane early, nodding politely at the flight attendants. Her seat was in the middle section, 14C, beside the window. She tucked her bag under the seat, buckled in, and took a deep breath. The smell of jet fuel, the gentle vibration of the aircraft, even the sound of the intercom, it all brought back memories. It wasn't the same as the cockpit of an F-16, but something about being on a plane still made her feel at home. As the other passengers filled the rows, Emily glanced out the window, her mind drifting. She remembered her first solo flight, the day she earned her wings, the radio call signs of her old teammates: Viper, Eagle, Raven, and her own, Hawk. That name had followed her everywhere. It was more than a nickname. It was a promise she made to herself, to fly high, protect others, and never give up no matter how rough the sky got. The plane pushed back from the gate, engines roaring to life. Emily felt that familiar pull in her chest, the quiet thrill that only takeoff could bring. The flight lifted into the air smoothly, the city growing smaller below. She leaned her head back and closed her eyes, thinking she might get a few hours of peace before landing. But fate had other plans for her that day. About 40 minutes into the flight, the pilot's calm voice came over the speaker. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. In a few minutes, we'll have company in the skies. 2 Air Force F-16s will be flying alongside us for a short joint airspace exercise. Nothing to worry about, and it's routine." The passengers stirred with curiosity. Some looked out the windows, excited to see real fighter jets up close. Children pressed their faces to the glass. Phones came out ready to record. For most of them, this was a rare treat. For Emily, it was something entirely different. She looked to her right, and far in the distance, 2 small dots appeared, moving fast, cutting through the clouds with precision. Her heart tightened as she watched them approach. Even from miles away, she could tell by their movement, steady, confident, graceful, that these were skilled pilots. She smiled softly, remembering how that used to be her up there, slicing through the blue sky with full power beneath her wings. The 2 F-16s came closer, their sleek gray bodies glinting in the sunlight. The passengers gasped and pointed as the jets settled into formation beside the commercial plane, keeping perfect distance. Emily's pulse quickened. She felt an old instinct, the kind that made her want to check instruments, scan horizons, and listen for commands. But she was just a passenger now, seat-belted in, watching her old world from the outside. Then something strange happened. The pilot of the commercial plane made another announcement, his tone a little lighter, almost surprised. "Folks, this doesn't happen every day," he said. "We've just received word from air traffic control that one of our passengers is actually a decorated Air Force pilot. Captain Emily Carter. Call sign Hawk. Seems our friends outside recognize her name." Every head in the cabin turned. People began whispering, looking around to spot her. Emily froze, her breath catching in her throat. How could they have known? She hadn't told anyone who she was. Her jacket with her name patch was zipped away in her bag. Maybe one of the ground staff had noticed it at check-in, Or maybe someone had recognized her from years past. But before she could even process it, something extraordinary unfolded outside the window. One of the F-16s broke slightly away from formation and dipped its right wing, a gesture that every pilot knew. It was a salute. A mark of deep respect, the kind used when one aviator greets another, especially someone who had earned it through service and sacrifice. The second jet followed, repeating the gesture in perfect sync. The passengers went silent. The moment seemed to slow down, 2 jets saluting one woman sitting quietly in seat 14C. Emily's hand moved to her mouth as her eyes filled with tears. She tried to smile, but emotion caught her halfway. Memories flooded back. The noise of radio chatter, the fear before missions, the faces of friends lost in the line of duty. She had buried all of it deep inside, but now it all came rushing back in one wave of pride and pain. She pressed her forehead lightly against the window and whispered, "Thank you." The sound was barely audible, but she meant it with all her heart. The passengers began to applaud, unsure of what else to do. Some clapped softly. Others simply watched in awe. The flight attendants, moved by the gesture, came by to thank her quietly. One young man sitting beside her said in amazement, "Ma'am, that's the coolest thing I've ever seen in my life." "You're one of them?" Emily smiled faintly and nodded. "Used to be," she said softly. "Used to be." The F-16 stayed alongside the plane for a few more minutes before slowly pulling away, their engines leaving white trails that disappeared into the blue. As they departed, one of them waggled its wings again, one final goodbye. Emily raised her hand in a small wave, knowing they'd understand even from miles away. When the jets were gone, the cabin slowly returned to normal, though the feeling lingered. People were still talking, some in whispers, others in excitement. But Emily sat quietly, her mind far away. She thought about the early mornings on base, the endless drills, the camaraderie, and the shared laughter in hangars after long days. She remembered how much she loved the sky, not just the flying, but what it represented: freedom, courage, and connection. As the hours passed and the plane continued toward Washington, Emily couldn't stop replaying the salute in her mind. It was such a small gesture, yet it carried a weight she couldn't put into words. For years she had believed her service was something behind her, a closed chapter that belonged to a younger version of herself. But that day, high above the clouds, she realized something important. The respect she had earned didn't vanish when she left the cockpit. It lived on, carried by those still flying, by the people who remembered her call sign, Hawk. When the flight finally began its descent, the sun was setting, coloring the sky in warm gold and pink hues. Emily watched quietly, feeling at peace for the first time in a long while. The landing gear lowered, and she felt that familiar thump as the plane touched down on the runway. The passengers applauded again, as many do at the end of a good flight, but this time it felt different. It felt like a tribute, not just for a smooth landing, but for a story that had touched everyone who witnessed it. As she stepped off the plane, a few passengers approached her. Some thanked her for her service. A mother introduced her teenage son, who said he dreamed of becoming a pilot one day. Emily smiled, placed a gentle hand on his shoulder and said, "Then keep your eyes on the sky and never stop believing you belong up there." Outside, the cool evening breeze brushed against her face. She looked up at the faint trail left by the F-16s hours earlier, now almost gone. A soft smile crossed her lips. She hadn't expected recognition. She hadn't wanted it. But that salute, silent and swift, reminded her that some connections never fade. Even after the engines stop and the uniforms are folded away, the sky still remembers its own. And sometimes, if you're lucky, it sends a quiet salute your way, just to remind you that you were never forgotten. That day, Emily Carter boarded as just another passenger in 14C, but when she left, she carried something she hadn't felt in years: pride, peace, and the unspoken bond of those who serve the skies. When the plane touched down at Washington Dulles Airport that evening, most passengers were still talking about what they had seen in the sky. Some were showing the videos they had recorded on their phones, while others kept glancing at Emily as if they were still processing what had happened. She smiled politely. thanked the flight attendants, and quietly stepped off the plane, hoping to blend into the crowd again. But it was too late. Her story had already taken flight in a way she never expected. As she walked through the terminal, her phone began to buzz again and again. At first she ignored it, thinking they were just ordinary notifications. But when she finally checked, she saw dozens of messages from old friends, fellow pilots, and even her commanding officer from years ago. Someone on the flight had posted a short video of the salute on social media, and it had already gone viral. The caption read, "Two F-16s saluting one of their own, a retired Air Force pilot sitting in seat 14C. Within hours, the clip spread everywhere. News channels picked it up. Veterans groups shared it. People from all over the world commented with words of gratitude and admiration. Emily couldn't believe it. She hadn't wanted attention. She had always preferred to keep her service quiet, away from cameras and headlines. But this was something different. This was genuine respect, not fame. It was people remembering what service and honor truly meant. She sat in a quiet corner of the terminal for a few minutes, watching the video herself. There she was, sitting by the window, her face half hidden, as the two fighter jets dipped their wings in salute. Even through the small phone screen, it was powerful. It made her heart ache and swell at the same time. She whispered to herself, "You never really leave it behind, do you?" Over the next few days, her story spread across the country. Reporters reached out for interviews. The Air Force issued a short statement confirming her identity and her years of service, describing her as a highly respected and decorated pilot who had served with courage and excellence. They mentioned her call sign, Hawk, and the missions she had flown overseas. Emily's phone didn't stop ringing. Friends from her academy days called to laugh and cry with her. Some of her former trainees messaged her saying, "Ma'am, that salute was for all of us who learned from you." Even though she felt shy about the sudden attention, Emily couldn't help feeling proud, not of the fame, but of the connection it rekindled. She had spent years trying to move on from her military life, but deep down, she missed the unity, that silent understanding between those who risked their lives together. One evening, as she sat on her porch with a cup of tea, she received a message that brought tears to her eyes. It was from Lieutenant Mark Daniels, one of the F-16 pilots who had saluted her that day. His message was simple. "Ma'am, I was one of the pilots on your escort flight. When we saw your name on the passenger list, we couldn't believe it. Hawk was a legend in our training squadron. You taught people like me what it means to fly with heart. That salute was the least we could do." Emily read the message several times, her heart heavy with emotion. She typed back slowly, "You didn't have to, but you'll never know how much it meant to me. Thank you for remembering." A few weeks later, she received an invitation from the Air Force Base where she had once trained new recruits. They were holding an air show and wanted her to attend as a guest of honor. At first, she hesitated. She wasn't sure she wanted to step back into that world, the uniforms, the ceremonies, the reminders of the past. But something in her told her it was time. When the day came, she drove to the base early in the morning. As soon as she saw the wide-open runway and heard the faint hum of jet engines warming up, memories came flooding back. She parked her car and sat for a moment, watching a group of young cadets march across the tarmac. Their faces were filled with excitement and determination, just like hers had been years ago. She smiled to herself and whispered, "You've still got a long way to fly, kids. Make it count." Inside the hangar, she was greeted by familiar faces, some old friends, some new officers who had only heard stories about her. They treated her with warmth and deep respect. "Captain Carter," one of them said, shaking her hand firmly. "It's an honor to finally meet the woman behind the call sign Hawk." She laughed softly and replied, "I'm just Emily now." But everyone still called her Captain. Then, to her surprise, the two F-16 pilots who had saluted her walked in. Lieutenant Daniels and his wingman, Captain Rivera, stood tall in their flight suits. Daniels smiled as he approached her. "Ma'am," he said, "I hope you don't mind us making a bit of noise that day." Emily chuckled, shaking her head. "Noise?" That was the most beautiful sound I've heard in years. They talked for hours, about flying, about the changing technology, about the bond that never breaks between pilots. Daniels told her how much her legacy meant to the younger generation. "Everyone still knows your story," he said. "The missions you flew, the calm you kept when others panicked, You're the reason some of us believed we could do this. Emily listened quietly, humbled. She had never thought of herself as a legend. She had just done her job the best she could. But hearing it from them made her realize that sometimes, small actions you forget about end up inspiring others for a lifetime. During the air show, Emily was invited to stand near the runway as the jets performed their maneuvers. When the two F-16s, the same ones that had saluted her weeks earlier, soared overhead, she couldn't stop smiling. Their speed, their grace, the way they cut through the sky. It was everything she had loved and missed. The commentator announced her name to the crowd, and people stood to applaud. Emily felt a mix of pride and humility. She didn't need awards or medals. This was enough. After the show, as the crowd began to leave, Daniels approached her again. "Ma'am, there's something I think you should see," he said. He handed her a small framed photograph. It was a still image from the video, the exact moment when the two jets had dipped their wings beside the commercial plane. Beneath it, the words were engraved, "For Captain Emily Hawk Carter, the sky remembers its own." Emily's eyes filled with tears. She held the frame close to her chest and said softly, "You boys didn't have to do all this." Daniel smiled. "We did, ma'am, because every one of us up there is flying a little higher because of what you taught us." That night, when she returned home, she placed the framed photo on her desk. It sat beside her old pilot's helmet and a small American flag folded neatly from her last deployment. She stared at it for a long time, feeling a sense of peace she hadn't felt in years. In the days that followed, Emily decided to do something meaningful with the attention her story had brought. She began speaking at local schools, especially to young girls who dreamed of becoming pilots. She told them her story, not the part about fame, but about perseverance, courage, and believing in yourself when things get hard. She talked about teamwork, humility, and the importance of never forgetting where you come from. Her words inspired many. Some of those students would later write her letters, saying she had changed the way they saw their future. Even though she had once thought her story ended when she left the Air Force, Emily realized now that some stories never truly end. They just change direction. She was no longer in the cockpit, but she was still guiding others, still flying in a way that mattered. Sometimes, late at night, she would sit outside and watch the stars. Whenever she heard the faint sound of jets passing high above, she'd smile. She knew that somewhere up there, young pilots were carrying on the same mission, whispering call signs over their radios, trusting one another with their lives, just as she once did. And every now and then, when she felt the need to reconnect with her old world, she'd drive to the nearest airbase, park near the fence and watch the takeoffs. The roar of engines still made her heart race. It wasn't sadness she felt anymore, and it was gratitude. Gratitude for the skies that had once been her home, for the people who still remembered her, and for that unexpected day in seat 14C, when two pilots reminded her that her wings were never truly gone. One evening, months after the air show, Emily received another message from Lieutenant Daniels. It was a short video clip taken from his cockpit camera. The footage showed two jets flying in perfect formation under a bright orange sunset. At the end, his voice came through the radio. "For Hawk, you'll always have a place in the sky." Emily watched the video quietly, smiling through her tears. She didn't reply with words. Instead, she walked outside, looked up at the vast sky, and whispered, "Fly safe, boys." In that moment, she realized that the salute wasn't just about her. It was for everyone who had ever served. Every pilot who had faced fear and still taken off anyway. Every person who had dedicated their life to something greater than themselves. Emily Carter had once been just another name on a flight manifest, sitting quietly in seat 14C. But that day, when two F-16s bowed their wings in her honor, they reminded the world and her that courage, service, and kindness never fade away. The sky had simply found a beautiful way to say, "Thank you." And from that day on, every time she looked up and saw a jet trace across the blue, she didn't just see an aircraft. She saw a living reminder of her past, of friendship, honor, and the unbroken bond that keeps all who serve forever connected above the clouds.